It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome, Quiller Nation. Thank you for being here. You know, I'm always appreciative of you allowing me and this program into your space, whatever that space might be. For many of you, I know it's inside your car, but that's okay. I like to be a traveler. Send me an email. Let me know where you take me. I would love to hear from you about where I am when I'm with you. Today, I have a very special guest from Canada. He is an author. His name is Peter Darbyshire, and he has written a series of books called the Book of Cross series. And I recently read his number 2, The Dead Hamlets. And as many of you know, I've been sort of on a quest to find authors who are doing historical fiction based in or on Shakespeare or the Elizabethan or Jacobean eras. And Peter has this series that takes things to a whole new world, literally, in the world of the supernatural and even the macabre. And so I think some of you are really going to enjoy his writing, and we're going to talk to him about his books. Peter, welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, I know that this book, The Dead Hamlets, that tells us a lot right off the bat, doesn't it? I know that this is book 2, and I did not read the first book, The Mona Lisa Sacrifice, and I haven't gone on to the third one yet, obviously. But I know that one of the reasons we're talking about this book is because this is the new edition this year, the 2024 edition, and that's what we're here to talk about, is how this new edition is now available. And we'll, of course, let listeners know how to find it so that they can get their hands on it. This is airing after Christmas, so it would have to be late Christmas presents if that's something that they want to do. But remember, the 12 days of Christmas, you could give presents all the way up until January 6th. So just letting you know that, Quillers, that is an option. I found right off the bat that I really didn't need to have read the first book in order to enjoy this book. I did have some questions that did pop up through reading it that I was like, that seems like I need to go back and figure out what that means or what that relationship is with these two characters. But it was really written in such a way that it's not absolutely necessary to have read the first book to enjoy this book. Was that an intent? Was that something you did on purpose, probably?
Yeah. I wanted each of the books to stand alone, and I'm so happy to hear that you were able to sort of jump in book 2, and you weren't immediately lost. There is a through kind of arc throughout the books, and particularly in the fourth one that I've just finished and handed into the publisher. But with each one, I do try and have them stand on their own. So if somebody picks it up, that they can read it and not be confused.
Does the fourth one continue to delve into the realm of English literature the way that this book does?
I think more so than, probably equivalent to the Dead Hamlets. And I can't say too much about the fourth one yet because, it's
no spoilers.
But very similar. And for those people who aren't familiar with the series, it's I'll just give a quick sort of synopsis. They tell the tale of this immortal soul, Cross, who he's a soul who basically has found himself trapped in the body that Christ left behind after the crucifixion and ascension. He doesn't know why he's in that body, and he's very much a sort of a mortal spirit. He's a drunk, he's a thief, hangs out with unsavory characters, such as the fairy, Christopher Marlowe, both when Christopher Marlowe is alive, and then later on when Christopher Marlowe becomes undead, he hangs out with him. Gorgons, literary characters such as Alice from the Alice in Wonderland tales is basically his best friend. And he hunts angels because of their heavenly grace. He can sort of, if he kills them, he can steal their heavenly grace and use it to kind of basically work miracles with his bodies. But a big part of it was sort of my, the books are full of literary allusion and myth and history, and they're really my love letter to literature and the arts and to reading. And obviously, in the case of the Dead Hamlets, to theater. Did have a bit of a theater background. I was never, a professional actor or anything like that, but I did university theater, and then I worked sort of behind the scene of stagehands and sort of things like that for a few years as well. So I haven't done theater lately, but I still very much miss it, and I think that sort of came through in this book.
I would agree with that. Being a longtime theater artist and theater being one of my greatest passions in life, I would agree that it definitely comes through in the pages of the book. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the book, probably the thing I enjoyed most about the book, are the literary allusions and references, sort of the little inside jokes, the Easter eggs type of things that you leave through the pages of the book. And for those of us who are well versed in Shakespeare, of course, there's tons of those in there for us who know the plays, who know the lines, who know the characters, and also, the history and the background of the plays. And I think that's one of the reasons why my listeners will really enjoy this series, is because, I don't want to sound, we oftentimes, those of us in the post-Stratfordian world of Shakespeare authorship skepticism, we get accused of being aristocratic or pompous. And at the risk of sounding like that, this book particularly, and like I said, I haven't read the others, but I'm going to guess that they're probably very similar in that they're for very smart people. I felt that this book was written to my knowledge of literature and the texts that you relate to, that you talk about, that you reference in the book.
Yeah, pardon me. I think so. I kind of, people ask me, to like, what are the comparables, right? And I sort of say it's like, Sandman Comics meets Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead meets, Umberto Eco. Those are kind of like the cultural touchstones for me that were sort of in mind when I was trying to, when I first conceived of these stories. And again, I'm happy that you like all those Easter eggs and all that, because when I was writing this one, I did have that concern, the because it's so focused on theater, and I just thought, is it too niche? I love theater, and I know all my friends are going to love it because they all have a theater background or love the arts. But you just don't sort of know how well it's going to, resonate outside of those circles. But it actually seems to have been as popular as the other books, and in some ways, it's kind of my favorite book. Like I have favorite parts about each of them, but just because of the theater connections were so familiar to me when I was writing the book, that it felt sort of more personal to me, this one.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned like sort of this amalgamation of influences, and we I think we often feel compelled to do that when we're describing something. I think whether it's because of the literary world and the way that publishers work and book agents work, or the way that producers of film work, people always want what they call that elevator pitch, where you're almost required to use references to other works and say, well, it's sort of this work meets that work, or these works meet each other, and that's sort of the flavor of it. And I feel like we don't always want to make those comparisons, but I'm glad that you referenced a comic book reference, because I found myself throughout the book, right from the get-go, I kept thinking to myself, this could be a great graphic novel. And your writing is such that the imagery in the mind, I kept seeing the panels of the frames of the story and the images that I think would have gone with it well. It'd also make a great movie along the lines of like the Von Helsing movie with Hugh Jackman, if you're familiar with that film. Yep. I kind of got a feel, it felt like that a lot. Or The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is another one that kept coming to mind, because I was like, this film is, film. This book has such visceral images, and, I felt like, Frank Miller could have been involved in illustrating this book.
I would Yeah, I would be more than happy to see such an adaptation, comic book, film, what have you. I mean, so far the only interest I've had has actually been kind of intriguing. Was somebody wanted to adapt it into a role playing game, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, because they thought the world would be really suited for that, and I was like, sure, go for it. And it's sort of a project that's in limbo. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to see any sort of adaptations. A stage adaptation would be fun.
I don't know that that would be possible without a lot
Yeah.
of pig's blood.
Yeah.
Because I will warn everybody, there are a lot of violent moments, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with the supernatural and the undead. But those who are fans of series like True Blood or Walking Dead or any of those types of sort of science fiction fantasy style, I think you'll really enjoy this series. It's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure, but it's definitely the first time I've really seen historical fiction sort of bounce into the world of science fiction and fantasy in this way. And I found that very compelling. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the program, because it is so different from anything else we've ever covered here on Don't Quill the Messenger.
Yeah, it was an interesting process to write because I wanted them to be fantastic books, just by their very nature. With the literary characters for Friends, for instance, and in the Dead Hamlets, the one we're talking about today, like he actually hangs out with. There's a bit in the past where he hangs out with Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare, both of who are sort of magical characters. Christopher Marlowe is like a demon hunter, and Shakespeare has got this magical, quill that has all sorts of powers, including granting immortality. And then later on, after Marlowe's death, he finds a way to bring Marlowe back to life, and sort of hangs out with this undead undead Christopher Marlowe. And there's various other characters like the fairy. The way the book starts is Cross has this history from the previous book with the fairy court, who have their own history with Shakespeare that we're all sort of familiar with from Midsummer Night's Dream and so forth. And he stumbles into a production of Hamlet in Berlin, where he watches an actor is killed on stage in an apparent mishap, and then he quickly realizes this is a fairy production of Hamlet. Lights come up, the audience is dead, and it's all the people that apparently a ghost has killed in these productions that the fairy put on, and his daughter is a member of the fairy court, through stuff that happened in the first book, and she's sort of set to be the next victim. So there's he's got to go solve the mysterious, what's this Shakespearean ghost that's basically haunting these productions of Hamlet.
Well, and I think one of the things that is also very intriguing about the book is, as you mentioned, because you referenced the first book, and there are references obviously to the first book and his history, the history of Cross, your leading character. But one of the things that I find intriguing about him is he's almost like a time traveler in the sense that he has lived through the centuries. And so we also get that sort of flavor of flashback moments that into times in history that are intriguing to us. And I think one of the reasons why people like historical fiction is because of that feeling that we can sort of travel through time with the characters in a book.
Yeah, and yes, there's a lot of flashbacks, and he goes into these flashbacks, and he has this sort of adventure with Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe, in which a certain theater burns down, and that's when I had to really try and get the history right. So I don't concern myself too much with being historically accurate the whole time, because these books are largely sort of urban fantasy, supernatural thriller, whatever kind of genre label you want to slap on it. Historical fantasy, you could even call them that. But I do want to make sure I get the details right about the time period and the historical characters. So and then I can kind of play with that and make Marlowe a demon hunter and make Shakespeare magical and run with it. But I want to make sure I'm getting as much of his life sort of accurately depicted as possible, so that people would then go, oh, this was actually the real Shakespeare, and it turns out in this book, yeah, that he's magical, or I totally believe this historical version of Christopher Marlowe, and I totally believe this depiction of London that you have set up in the book. And so I do a lot of research, and I didn't have to do as much for this book because I had that background from my university days, because I was a university and theater major. And I did some acting in Christopher Marlowe plays, and studied Marlowe, and obviously studied Shakespeare. I studied Shakespeare back in high school even. So there's a certain amount of background info, but some of the academic stuff came in quite handy too, like learning about the Hamlet and the notions of authorship around Shakespeare, which they don't really teach you in high school, but when you hit university, you start to explore that kind of stuff. So I was really trying for that blend of that historical accuracy and that just absolute fantastic. And that's why I kind of say it's like Sandman meets Tom Stoppard meets Umberto Eco, because I think it's that sort of combination of things.
Yeah, I think it definitely has that flair to it. And I think that it is important in any historical fiction or books of that nature that you have to have those moments of accuracy so that your audience who has learned or does know those details has those sort of aha moments. And they're especially fun when you layer on your fiction or your fantasy on top of that, right? Like we all have the aha moment of, oh yeah, the theater burned down. But then your explanation as to why takes us into your world version, right? The fantasy fiction world version of it, but it connects to truth in enough of a way that makes me go, okay, yeah, I'm with you. My willing suspension of disbelief is being maintained through those nuggets, I think.
Yeah, I always wanted it to be in a historical setting that had some significance. So, there's certain theaters that are presented in the book, like Drury Lane Theater, and places like the Globe. There's a Globe Theater that is in the book. And I wanted Tower of London, like I wanted these places that people recognize and are real, and then just twist the myths around them and the legends around them to fit my book, to fit the Dead Hamlets. Because it's just, I find it much more effective if it's something that the reader already comes to with their own sort of mythology around it, and that if you can just embed your story into that mythology, then it makes it all so much richer.
Well, I also feel like all works of art are somewhat autobiographical. And I found myself while reading the book wondering, and one of the questions I wanted to ask you is about your own travels through the world, because as you mentioned, the Tower of London features, Berlin features, the cemetery in Paris. You've been to all these places, obviously, it would appear. And if not, then you're just really a great writer who is just writing from, having studied those locations online or something. But I wanted to ask you, to the extent of your world travels, were you including places you personally visited, sort of like Cross is seeing the world through your eyes type of a thing?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Berlin, Berlin, not so much. I've been to Berlin, but not since I was like 12. Um, but London for sure. And I visited the Tower of London, and I went to, the New Globe Theater there. And so in this book, there's this, a production where Cross kind of messes with the production that's happening. I think that's supposed to be like 12th Night or something. I can't remember. And he sort of uses a bit of magic to make it turn into Macbeth. So he can pull the witches out of the play, because that's where they actually live, the real witches, right? And he pulls them out of the play so he can question them about something. And it's just sort of biblical downpour on the theater. And that was totally my experience when I went and saw, I can't remember what I saw there, but I went to the new Globe, and of course I got thoroughly drenched in the rain and watching a Shakespeare production. So I've been to most of the places. In some cases, like I wrote these books actually quite some time ago. And so these are the new editions. And the first time I wrote them, I was operating on memory of what those places were. But when it came time to do the new editions, there'd been such advances in technology that with Google now basically has walkthroughs of every sort of major historical building. So I was able to kind of go through and go, oh, like I remember that detail wrong in that particular building, and I could fix it, and sort of flesh things out and give some of the settings actually a bit more character because now you can see them. So yes, they were places I largely visited, but then in the new editions, I did kind of dress them up a bit more in the historical detail and what they actually were.
Well, in between,
Um,
as you mentioned, between the Globe and the Tower and Westminster, of course, plays a major
mhm.
part in the book. I'm trying to be careful that some of the questions I want to ask you about or some of the things I want to talk about in the book, I want to make sure I'm not giving away too much or
Right.
giving away too many spoilers. So I'm trying to be as careful as possible. But Westminster plays a big part. As you mentioned, there's theater in Berlin, and I mentioned the cemetery in France. And so, also we see that, Cross is sort of a world traveler. He almost has to be in order to be solving this mystery. And it is a mystery. And it's also one of the reasons why I think that the listeners of this program will enjoy it, because one of the things that binds us all together is the Shakespeare authorship mystery. And we're all sort of super sleuths, and we love a good mystery. And this one has a great mystery. What is haunting this play? What is haunting the play of Hamlet? And I love how you play with regularly throughout the book, like everyone thinks they have the answer. Well, duh. It's the ghost of Hamlet haunting Hamlet. Well, no, not quite. That's not. I love that part. It almost starts to become the running joke in the book,
Yep.
is that everybody jumps to, well, it's the ghost. Well, no, not that ghost. This cursed ghost, as it were, or demon, or whatever it is that has attached itself to the play, that wants to see those who produce the play fulfill the destiny of what it is that the curse, the ghost. I'll leave that open for the audience to figure out when they read it. But there's a fulfillment trying to be happening there, and when you discover that, you're like, oh yes, that totally makes sense. And I don't think it gives it away at all to mention that obviously the Hamlet plays a big part of this. And I want to shift into that, as a matter of fact, because I'm curious. There are a few spots in the book where I found myself, because as I'm reading anything that has to do with Shakespeare or the Elizabethan or Jacobean eras, I'm always find myself wondering, what is the author's position on Shakespeare authorship? And of course, you had to know I was going to get to that at some point in the episode. And there are these moments where I felt like you hint at, obviously you were aware of it, because those moments are very clear, that there is this acknowledgement of this issue, even though you personify William Shakespeare as a character in your book. But the powers that you give him and the things that you connect to him also made me feel like that you might be a Marlowe proponent for authorship. So I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I mean, I love Marlowe, and I think Marlowe has sort of gotten, shortchanged by history. And I'd love to see kind of more attention paid to Marlowe. Um, to me, I kind of love the fact that there is a mystery, and I hope it's never solved because I find the mystery more compelling than who it would actually be. So in fact, I don't have any opinion as to whether was it Marlowe or was it, some group of writers or Edward de Vere or Bacon or whoever. It's it kind of doesn't matter to me. I like that. Yeah, I like that there's this enigma there, and because I find it compelling, and I think it keeps people interested, um, and I think the mystery is actually more valuable than knowing who it was.
Well, you do make it, I think, pretty clear through the book that you believe Marlowe is the greater writer. I think is what came out for me, was that you have an affinity for Marlowe and his works. Obviously, it should be of no surprise to anyone if you're dealing with Marlowe, and Peter has created Marlowe as a demon hunter, that Faustus is going to play a part in this book. I'll leave it at that, but obviously that's an obvious connection. And it's not a far stretch than you would think almost. I mean, Marlowe was accused of all kinds of horrendous crimes, including, atheism, sacrilege, boy buggery. I mean, you name it. And they pretty much threw all the mud they could at him. And obviously Faustus includes, some really, at the time when it was written and produced, intense scenes that are, borderline, burning at the stake type of stuff. Right. I think it's funny because now when we read it, like, some of the things are so tame. Faustus shows up and knocks the Pope's hat off of his head, and ooh, in fact, the last time I produced that play, I know sacrilege of its own, but I rewrote the sin scenes to make them more visceral and make them more worldly, in the sense of what today's audiences would expect a man who has sold his soul to the devil to do, Yeah. But you make it very clear that you think Marlowe, but you also hint at collaborations. Like you basically have this hint that Marlowe and Shakespeare worked together at some point, or probably did, or could have, or that others were involved. You mentioned Webster, which again totally makes sense in a storyline that involves the undead and gruesome things, because obviously Webster, I mean, holy moly. I mean, even Stoppard gives an homage to Webster in Shakespeare in Love, right? He's got a young Webster running around going, I like Titus Andronicus, it's my favorite, kind of a thing, So I think that from the perspective of an authorship skeptic, there are those enjoyable little Easter egg moments. But there was one particular I wanted to talk to you about, and it involves Alice. Mm-hmm. And it's somewhere, right, I'm going to say I can tell you it's on page 66, ironically. But at one point, she and Cross are talking, and they're in a library, and I won't give too much away, but she says about Shakespeare, she says, maybe he wasn't real either. And then she goes, but then who would have written his plays? And Cross responds, and it's very autobiographical now after hearing what you said. This is all very interesting, but it's not helping me solve my problem. And I kind of felt like, okay, so is that sort of you, Peter, say, the authorship question, the authorship mystery is very interesting, but it's not really solving any problems.
And it is interesting, but it's Shakespeare's so tricky because it's gotten caught up in this whole commercial machine that I think and you can even include academia in that at points, right? Because people's professions and livelihoods kind of depend on it. And it's there's the merch involved, and the theaters that have selling their season tickets on that sort of particular model of Shakespeare and stuff. And so it makes it challenging to kind of present different constructions of Shakespeare, or to really do a proper kind of interrogation, if you would, of who wrote these plays, or where were these plays influences from. And because there's not only that question of, was it Shakespeare, but then there's the question of, in the case of like the Dead Hamlets, did he write Hamlet, or was that cribbed from something earlier? I read like the maybe a Thomas Kyd play, or maybe some other French or Greek work, or maybe the sort of Hamlet, that sort of mythical first version of Hamlet was just an earlier version that Shakespeare wrote. But so there's all these layers and layers of mystery around it that I think that, yeah, again, this sort of, Shakespeare industrial complex has a pretty vested interest in not really addressing, and kind of just, yeah, not answering it at all. So it's, for me, it's impossible. I'm certainly not a Shakespeare expert. Like, I did undergrad Shakespeare in university and worked a bit in the theater, so I'm obviously aware of some of these things, but I would never call myself a Shakespeare scholar. But the sort of Marlowe versus Shakespeare in this, in the Dead Hamlets, is really just a reflection of my sort of personal tastes. And I found that, yeah, I really liked Marlowe, resonated with me better for some reason. I appreciate the Shakespeare, I appreciate the comedy, and I appreciate the sort of interrogations of leadership and all sorts of those things that are present in so many of his plays. But the sort of questions of like the human condition, I found more resonant with Marlowe, and with Webster as well. It's funny because, when I look back, I love that moment in Shakespeare in Love that you reference. Like, to me, that's like the highlight of the movie for me. And it was, I was like, I remember reading Webster and some of those other plays at the time, the contemporaries, and just being stunned at what they were doing and how audacious it was, and the sort of critiques of their society and the ways in which they were constructing values. It was all just sort of revolutionary for me in a way that um, Shakespeare never was. Marlowe was a little, Webster, certainly much more so.
I find that to be one of the greatest clues to solving the mystery of Shakespeare authorship. And that is that when you look, and I think you're absolutely right, when you look at writers like Marlowe, like Webster, and even Johnson, they are, I believe, playwrights who are writing more for the audience of the playhouses. And I think when you look at the works of Shakespeare, they are written more for the aristocracy.
Mhm.
And I think that the messages within them are aimed at their audiences. I always say that the works of Shakespeare were written for an audience of one, Queen Elizabeth, first. And after her, then it's the court. And then after the court, it's the common audiences, the groundlings, as it were. But I think writers like Marlowe, definitely Webster's, probably the first shock writer, of English literature. But certainly Johnson, I believe, is trying to send his messages to more of the common or the merchant class about society and about the caste system, as it were, the class system that they live underneath. And I think that that's a big clue. I think that we then see, again, sort of the autobiographical nature of art coming out through those men. Marlowe, of course, deeply involved in the intrigue of the court. We know that, and we've now come to know that, and makes great sense that all of the underground spy stuff he was doing. Like, I was almost surprised that you didn't have Walsingham pop into the book at some point as being like the chief demon hunter, and Marlowe worked for him, and like all of these people were working under him, and maybe Walsingham is the head of the Black Guard. I don't know. That wasn't revealed, and I hope I didn't give any too much away right there. But I kind of felt like, because there's plenty of talk about that. I don't think I've shared too much, but the audience, when you read the book, you'll figure out who the Black Guard are and why they're so important. I love the way that the shadow of the royals kind of hangs over everyone. Which was very true in that totalitarian state of during that time. But I love how you sort of carry that into the present through this world you've created. And I think that's important. But you do have a moment, and you have a character, he's called the Scholar. And very interesting character, by the way, who sort of absorbs everything he reads, and that's what gives him his immortality. And I love that imagery, by the way, because isn't that what good writing does? It sort of creates immortality in so many ways, not only for the author, but for the characters the author has created. And so I love that imagery, and I hope that's what you were intending by creating this character. But
Very much so, yeah.
he has this line where they're talking about, the origins of Hamlet. And he says, perhaps it is based on a lost play by one of Shakespeare's contemporaries. And then he says something very interesting, stood out to me. Perhaps an earlier play by a certain noble who did not wish to be known. And I thought, is that sort of your throw line for Edward de Vere or one of the other members of nobility who have been considered candidates for Shakespeare authorship?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, and again, I don't have a particular opinion on that because, if the scholars can't figure it out, then I'm certainly not going to have any more information. But I'm aware of those theories, so I wanted to sort of present those different theories throughout the book. Yes, was it Marlowe? Was it Edward de Vere? Was it somebody else? Was the play not even his, all those theories that come up. So they're just sort of presented at different times by different people in the book.
There is a Bacon reference too, I think, somewhere in the book, if I remember.
Yeah, I can't remember anymore.
Yeah, you reference him at least once in the book. But then sticking to, because obviously, everybody here knows I'm a staunch Oxfordian. That doesn't mean I'm not open to all the other ideas. And I'm one of those Oxfordians who says, okay, I'm an Oxfordian unless you can convince me otherwise. And you might be able to convince me otherwise. And that's why we need to continue to look at every other candidate to see what truth we can find. That's where I stand. Otherwise, I would just become as bad as a Stratfordian who says, no, this is the way it is, and I don't want to look at anything else. And I feel like there's a ton of risk in this mystery of those who seek to prove their foregone conclusions rather than analyze what's before them and add it to what they know. But I do want to ask you about, so talking about the scholar, and I love what you just said. Well, if the scholars can't figure it out, I'm not going to figure it out. And your character, the scholar, capital S, if he doesn't know who the true author is, no one will ever know. Which I think is very interesting. But then there's this moment where you talk about the death of a royal. I don't want to give too much away about how that happens or when it happens. But you say here, the royals are going to have you drawn and quartered for killing one of their own. You never, throughout that chapter or even subsequent chapters, you never identify who that royal is. And I almost felt like, and it's, there's my Oxfordian leanings, but I almost felt like he just killed Edward de Vere and isn't going to tell us that that's who it is. Am I crazy? Is there an identity there? Or do you reveal it later in another book? Do we ever find out who that dead royal is?
So often I like to write with sort of an open-ended, collaborative style with the reader. And what I mean by that is I like to sort of put in different pathways for readers to follow that I don't follow. And so I'll do this quite often where I'll be like, this is like that time we put on that production of Lear in Russia, but that's for another story. And I won't ever get back to it again, in a case like that. But it's something to sort of twig the reader's imagination. And it's kind of, you have to provide enough that they're interested and then leave out enough that they become even more interested. And I like the idea of the reader starting to generate some of the story on their own. It's kind of like I was saying about the other day, it's kind of like video games, right? The video games kind of have two models. You have like the sandbox model where you can run around and just do whatever you want. You can do quests if you want, but you don't have to. Or you've got the one that kind of just leads you on a trail or a path or whatever, and you can't get off, and you have to follow it. And I try and sort of find something in between, because obviously a book is kind of you're on a path, and you kind of have to follow it. but I have those sandbox elements there where, the reader can kind of imaginatively explore different areas. And so, yeah, I thought I could figure out which royal it is and name them for the audience, or I could just make it a royal and, have my own theories about it, and let the reader's imagination, develop that story. And so this is like a perfect example of that, where you went down that path. Is it Edward de Vere, right? Or, could it be somebody else? And to me, that's like a very interesting moment in the act of reading the book, is that you're starting to, generate like a para story, basically, that, runs parallel to the book, and it's sort of integrated into the book. So again, it's like I almost like don't want to answer that, because I find it more interesting to not have that answer there, and because you're going to come up with your reading of, okay, I think this is Edward de Vere. Somebody else may, come up with a completely different reading. Like I'm sure um, if I talk to the writer Chris Humphreys about it, who does a lot of historical fiction about England. He's written Plague and Fire, about the Great Fire of London and the Plague of London. He would probably have some other royal, that would be in that audience at that particular time. And to me, the important part for the story was there was a royal there, because now Marlowe is basically all the characters are screwed, but particularly Marlowe, because in these stories, yeah, the shadow of the royals hangs over everything. They're I don't give away too much, but they're clearly not normal creatures, and they sort of operate behind the scenes a lot. And I think they kind of represent that kind of monstrous behavior that we did see in royals in the past. We obviously don't see it to the same extent anymore, or if it's there, it's being, swept under the carpet very, very efficiently. But when we look back at history, we know there was lots of sort of really, monstrous behavior that was taking place on the part of the royals. And so I just kind of ran with that a bit and made the royals actual kind of monsters.
Well, we could argue that Prince Andrew is exhibiting monstrous behavior as a royal in modern times. And I received a scathing email complaint from a listener when I dared to suggest that Prince Harry might be an illegitimate prince. And not actually King Charles's real son. And so, I think that is part of the history. And I think one of the things that you do so well with your writing is you heighten everything, not unlike the great tragedians of old. And I think that's one of the beauties. Aristotle said that tragedy was the greatest of all art forms. And I don't think he was off from that, because it allows us, as the audience, or in this case, the reader, to go to places emotionally that we normally restrain ourselves from going.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, some of my most memorable moments, interestingly enough, have been in the theater, and it wasn't in the comedies. Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was sort of the tragedies that. I mean, one was not Shakespeare, and one was I saw in England production of Kafka's The Trial, which, I mean, maybe you could call it a tragedy, I suppose. And that was one of my most memorable moments. And then another one was a Shakespeare play I saw at the Barbican, and then Sweeney Todd, which has certainly moments of tragedy within it, for sure. I'm not sure how you would actually classify the play as a whole, but those are all my pivotal, formative theater moments.
Well, Sweeney Todd is obviously, we consider it, many people call it, I would call it an American opera. I think it's Sondheim's attempt at opera, an English opera. And all operas have to have those tragic endings and, again, heightened. Everything's heightened. Certainly in that play particular. I mean, when you're cooking people into pies, P.S. an homage to Shakespeare and Titus Andronicus, So, everything circles back to the works of Shakespeare in some way or another. But I did find it like I just was the whole time. I'm like, oh my God, he just killed Edward de Vere because Edward de Vere decided to show up at the premiere of Marlowe's new play. Which is something Edward de Vere would absolutely do, based on my understanding of the man's biography. Of course, he would want to go see Marlowe's new play being premiered, and of course, one that it has to do with Faustus selling his soul to the devil. So, I thought, wow, look at what Peter just did. he murdered our guy. How horrible. But you also, as we've been talking about, your knowledge of the texts is very clear. There are times, as you mentioned, you have Cross take a production of Twelfth Night and convert it into a production of Macbeth, and suddenly the actors have no choice but to start saying the lines from the wrong play, which I found very amusing, by the way, because when you do repertory Shakespeare, one of the questions that people ask you all the time is, do you ever say the wrong lines from the wrong play? Especially if you're doing true rep, like rotating nights of performances. And so audience members will always ask, wait a minute, you learn 2 or 3 plays all at the same time and you perform them night after night. Do you ever say the wrong lines from the wrong play? The answer is no, you never do. Not unless it's been corrupted like Cross is able to do. But I found that, I was snickering at that the whole time. I was like, that would be actually really awesome to watch. And it gave me an idea for an improv exercise to just throw a bunch of Shakespeare actors up on the stage and suddenly just shout out, okay, you have to do a scene from this play, go. And
that would be awesome.
And see how now, and then somebody else from the audience shouts out, now switch to this play and go. That would be actually really fun to watch.
If you do that, you have to let me know how it works out.
I will. And then, you obviously, because it's called the Dead Hamlets, there's a lot of Hamlet references, and there are several performances of Hamlet that occur in the play in different ways. I'll leave it at that without giving too much away. Mm-hmm. But, for those of us who know the play so well, those moments were fun because I'm saying the lines along with the characters in the book as it's playing out, and I know what's coming next. And I'm like, oh, okay, he's going here. He's going to this scene. Oh, he's going to that line. Oh, he's using this particular moment on purpose. And I love the way that all kind of connects together with this curse, this shadow hanging over the play that Cross is trying to solve for the fairy queen. So your text knowledge is great.
So tricky to write, because for your listeners, the sort of premise is the curse or a ghost or whatever it is, as it turns out, that compels the actors to sort of perform the play Hamlet sort of against their will at points, and brings in people who aren't actors and stuff like that. And so there's, actions that are taking place that they're fighting and stuff like that, but it's also within the kind of context of the play where they're spouting lines at each other. And so to have everything line up so that the lines kind of mirrored, what the characters were doing to, develop the story and try and, bring things to a conclusion and all that kind of stuff while they're kind of possessed. Because it was almost, you got the play and then what they're trying to do. So it's almost a parallel thing, but you have to make them merge. It felt a little like Sondheim to me, like, how Sondheim always has those sort of multiple strains of music that come together to form one musical number. And it was super challenging to write, but, I was also sort of blessed with it's pretty, there's a lot you can take in Shakespeare and make work in a dramatic setting. So I got kind of lucky there, and but yeah, it was hard, but it was also a lot of fun, and I felt so happy with the final product.
Well, it becomes sort of, I'm glad that you make the Sondheim comparison and the musical reference, because it's sort of like a fugue. which is what I think that's called when you have, two characters or more than two characters singing at the same time, living the same moments, or even sometimes they're on different sides of the stage, but they're both
Right.
living their individual moments on top of each other. And that is sort of what it felt like, was there's this fugue under, like the score is the lines of Hamlet, but the characters in the book who are being forced to play out the scene of Hamlet are actually trying to accomplish something completely different from what the characters of the play Hamlet are called upon to do. And I found that very compelling moment. Those were very compelling moments. And those were moments I thought I would really love to see that live. Like, I'd really like to see that played out in live action. And that's where I was like, okay, there are film moments in this book that I think would make for really interesting. I don't know. This could be a Netflix series, Peter. It's possible. It's very possible.
I wouldn't object.
I'm sure you wouldn't. Well, you need to get your publicists on that right away.
That's right.
Netflix, Amazon, I don't know who else, Hulu.
Yeah, they can all have a bidding war for it. Yeah.
Yeah. What are the big production companies up in Canada? Well, I know some of the big ones that from here actually do a lot of filming up there because there are aspects that are more economical.
Yeah, very much so. So I'm in the Vancouver area. I live just outside of Vancouver, in the Fraser Valley, and there's always filming going on up here. In fact, it's funny because I live beside a small town called Fort Langley, and it's one of those sort of quaint, riverside towns that kind of, looks like something from a Hallmark movie. And so they're always shooting Hallmark movies there. We see a lot of movies get shot in just the sort of what we call the Lower Mainland up here, because of proximity to Hollywood. But it's obviously a bargain, right? It's much cheaper to shoot up here, and I think probably going forward we'll probably see more because I think the Canadian dollar's tanked a bit against the U.S., so it'd probably be even more bang for Hollywood's buck that way. It's interesting. There's a bit of a theater scene here, but it's so dominated by Hollywood. Like, I think we're called Hollywood North up here. So that everybody sort of tends to work in film, and theater just kind of, struggles in the shadows of that, which I suppose is a universal condition at this point.
Well, having lived in LA for a long time before moving up here to Southern Oregon, where I'm at now, LA is an interesting arts town. New York always gets the label of being the theater town. And LA sort of is overlooked because of that, the shadow of Hollywood. They're the royals, right? The Hollywood elites are the royals of LA, to tie it to your book. But the truth of the matter is there is far more theater happening in LA than in New York. There are far more theaters in LA than there are in New York, including, anything from like the theater I used to own and operate. It was like a 50-seat black box theater to, all the way through to the Amundsen and the Pantages and the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. And so there's a lot more theater happening in LA, but just because LA didn't have a specific like Broadway, it sort of got overshadowed as a theater town, especially because of all the Hollywood happening. And, I would find, oftentimes we would hold auditions for a show and all these actors would submit and then they would show up to audition with their monologues. And some of them would be just absolutely horrible. And you could tell that they weren't actors. They wanted to be movie stars. So one of the side effects was you would have all of these people show up in LA trying to make it big in Hollywood, but actually weren't actors or had no actor training, or if they did, it wasn't very good. And that was one of the, real horrible downsides of it that I'm sure they don't have in New York. When they hold an audition in New York, I'll bet like actors actually show up, not wannabe movie stars.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if theater might be due for a resurgence, like post-pandemic. I know there's been such a desire among the parts of so many people to be in public proximity again. Even like my writing group, which is now turned into a D&D group as well. Like we can do everything by Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. But we make a point of like meeting in person at least once a month to play our games together and stuff like that, because we all sort of realized during the pandemic like our hunger for that social connection and that social contact. And I kind of wonder if we might see that in other ways. Like I just in this conversation, I just found myself wondering, like, what's the state of the theater, and might it actually, uh, start to draw more crowds because of that?
Well, I started a Shakespeare company here in Southern Oregon. Again, following along this theme, we live in the shadow of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. It's one of the biggest Shakespeare festivals in the world. And people said, "What are you doing? Are you crazy starting your own Shakespeare company like 45 minutes away from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival?" I said, "No, everybody needs a farm league for one thing. But also, they have gone into a totally different realm of theater and Shakespeare, particularly, where the works are practically unrecognizable there. And I'm a classicist, and I do classical theater, and we do a lot of first practices productions. And we have found that there is a tremendous appetite for that here. If anything, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival sort of primed the pump for this region to love Shakespeare and want to see it done in a classical style. And that's what we give our audiences. And we've just been growing and growing over the last 4 years. So I've seen that there is a hunger for it. There's definitely a market for not only live theater, but outdoor live theater under the stars.
Yes,
We perform at one of the local wineries here. We call it Shakespeare in the Vines. And we've had tremendous success. And so we're thrilled with that. And I think you're right. I think people want to go to the theater. I think they want to have communal experiences. And one of the things that I say about theater that I think is so important is it's one of the few forms of art where the audience and the artist are having a mutual experience at the same exact time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you go to a museum and you look at paintings or sculptures or, even watching a film, it's all done. It's all there. It's there for anyone to enjoy and view, sometimes hundreds of years after it was created, right? But the theater is so in the moment, so real. And also one of the most beautiful things about theater that I think is different than, say, a symphony concert is that every performance is different. Right. And the audiences know that. They know that at any given time, you're not exactly sure what to expect. Things can happen in the theater. And I think that that's something that pops up in your book, right? Like at each time there's this performance of Hamlet starting to happen in your book, I'm thinking, as the reader and from a theatrical perspective and an audience member, like, okay, what's going to happen now? Like, at any given time, something could happen, whether it could be really magnificent or it could be horribly tragic. And of course, the way you've set it up is it's going to be, the book's called The Dead Hamlets. It's going to be tragic at some point, but you don't know when. Like, when is the shoe going to fall is part of the suspense of the book. And I think it's one of the things that makes it intriguing throughout the storyline, But that's the magic of theater, isn't it?
Well, you identify it's that magic of the performance, and I think that sometimes gets lost in Shakespeare studies or theater studies. There's such a focus on the text, which is almost absurd when it comes to something like Hamlet, right? Like I was reading something I think just last night about this idea that some scholar had said, well, there is no text. There's just texts, like plural, that we cobble together into some form of majority accepted. This is a version, right? But it really overshadows the fact that these were texts that were meant to be performed, and to me the magic of theater is always in those performances. Like I love reading the text. But whenever I see a a performance of something, like that's what I remember years later. I remember seeing, Sweeney Todd multiple times. I worked on a production of Sweeney Todd. So I remember seeing, that show in the Barbican. I remember seeing that Kafka show I forget the name of the London theater now, but you know, that was 25, 30 years ago, something like that. And those things, are just such core memories for me. Um, and and yeah, you never know what you're going to get. Every performance can be completely different, because you get back to my notion of that sort of consensual collaboration between reader and writer. I think that takes place in the theater too, where you're creating, and as an actor, you're kind of going off of the feeling of the audience, the vibe of the audience, and that's in some ways going to inform your performance. And um, as an audience member, like you're brought out of your world and into this collaborative world of, like, not only the people on stage, but like the entire audience around you. So it's just such an interesting experience that can't there's nothing else like. I mean, concerts do it in their own way, and church ceremonies do it in their own way, but there's just something about the notion of the theater and those imaginary characters that is just, yeah, there's nothing else like it in the world, and that's why I so dearly love it, and wanted to write this book.
Well, you're spot on, because, actors, every actor I know will tell you that audiences have a life of their own. And you do get a sense when you're on the stage of that sort of 12th man on the field, to use an American football reference. But it's very, very true. Friday night crowds tend to be, show me crowds. They've just put in a long, hard work week. They're there on their Friday night. Their weekend is beginning. They're there to be entertained. Show me what you do. I'm here to be entertained. Saturday night crowds, they've had a day off now. They've had their Saturday. They're there to have fun. They're more interactive. They're going to be more responsive. They're going to cheer louder, laugh harder. Sunday matinees, usually full of a lot of older people. Sometimes you have to make sure they don't fall asleep in the front row. And you really so we all know the way that works through doing, multiple runs of multiple shows. So you know what you got to go in for, right? One of the worst things is here's a little sneaky insight that probably most people are aware of, but if not, I'll share the behind the curtain. So Saturday nights tend to be also the nights that casts will party the hardest after a performance, especially like on opening weekend. So Sunday matinees is the highest risk of having hungover actors performing in front of sleepy elderly people. And that's oftentimes a terrible, terrible mix, by the way.
Wow. It's good to know. So once I'm a bit older, I should probably skip those Sunday matinees. So I don't fall asleep.
Try for the Saturday nights whenever possible. Friday nights are good. If you're going to go to a Friday night show, be engaged and help spark up the audience around you.
Right.
That will provide for a better performance. But yeah, Sunday matinees could be a risk. Just telling you.
It's important knowledge.
Yeah, that's something that your lead character is very familiar with, right? Because I think, right off the bat, when we meet him, he is drinking himself into a hangover.
Yeah, and he goes into the theater because he's trying to find a place to sleep.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there you go. Because he's like, ooh, sleepy Sunday matinee. I'll just go crawl in the back somewhere. Nobody will even know I'm here. Yeah, see, there you go. It all ties together. Well, Quiller Nation, I want you to know his name is Peter Darbyshire. That's spelled Darbyshire. You can find Peter. Tell us how we can find the Cross series. Tell the listeners the easiest way for them to get their hands on these books.
The easiest way would be go to my website, peterdarbyshire.com. I've got all the links there. But you can find the Dead Hamlets and the other books of the series, the Mona Lisa Sacrifice and the Apocalypse Arc. I should be able to order them on Amazon and in Canada on Indigo, probably through Barnes & Noble in the States. My publisher is Canadian publisher Wolfsack and Wynn. It's WOLSAK, and Wynn, WYNN. You can order directly from them. They are available in print form and ebook form, so you can kind of get the medium of your choice. And then I'm on all the social medias, but I'm on a fair number of social medias just using my own name. So you can find me, Facebook.com, Peter Darbyshire, and Instagram, Peter Darbyshire, and Threads and Blue Sky. Not so much on Twitter these days, or X, whatever they're calling it today.
And one of the things I did notice about the book is there are chapters, but they're not numbered. But just to give the listeners an idea, it's roughly about 200 pages is this book. And so they're, I don't want to call them a quick read, but they're not, they're not giant novels. So they are very serial in that sense. And so that makes them fun to have, in your bag or in your purse, if you're taking it with you, to like pop it open and do a little bit of reading wherever you happen to be. They're perfect sized for that as well. So they're very manageable. If you're like me, I can't do ebooks. I'm too old for that, I guess.
Yeah, they're not epic fantasy tomes. They're sort of in that urban fantasy mass market kind of size. Because they do have certain size kind of guidelines for those books, although we didn't really follow in my case, but yeah, they're a pretty quick read, I think.
I do some substitute teaching, and so I was able to take it with me, and like on my lunch break or on the recess break, whatever, I was able to pop it open and read some along that way. So that's my point, is that it is definitely, they're like very travel friendly with regards to that for folks. So just so they're aware. And you did hint to us and say, because I always like to ask my guests, what are you working on now? But you did already share with us that there's a book 4. You said you just completed it, or you just sent it over, right?
Yeah, there's actually 2 more books.
Wow.
So there's a book 4, which is a novel, and I've completed like sort of the first draft and submitted it to the editors, and they'll look at it in the new year. So I won't. I won't have any feedback for a little while yet. And then actually prior to that, I had written a collection of short stories featuring Cross, because I had this just sort of thought one day. I was like, he's just such a great character because he's immortal and he's lived through all the ages. I can basically, put him in any setting I want. And so sometimes I would get ideas where I'd be like, oh, like that's kind of a fun idea, but it's not a novel. And so I just decided to start writing stories. So I've got like a Cross Wild West story, and a Cross Prohibition story, and a Cross meets the Brothers Grimm and gives them ideas for their fairy tales. And at one of them, there's actually another Marlowe story. So there's the one where he tries to find some lost work by Marlowe with the help of Alice from the Alice in Wonderland tales. And so that was a lot of fun to write about Marlowe again, like outside of the Dead Hamlets. So I think the plan is to do the novel in 2025, like publish it in 2025, and then probably the short story collection after that.
Well, can I suggest a Cross meets Edward de Vere story and discovers the secret goings on and writings of Edward de Vere, who has sold his soul to the royals, and under the threat of blackguard must continue to write propaganda plays to support the reign of Elizabeth I.
I think that's an amazing idea. Now you're definitely planting story ideas in my mind. Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things to do with guests. Tell them what they should be doing and then walk away and go, oh, I'll help you do that. But it's actually turned out a few times to create some really fun things. So, why not?
Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, I like it.
Well, he could be and do, because like you say, you have this character who you can kind of insert anywhere. And what a fun way to tie the Shakespeare authorship mystery to your character and sort of play with the supernatural. We do know for a fact that Edward de Vere was very interested in alchemy and the arcane, as were many of the nobility of the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras. You could throw John Dee in there. If Cross hasn't met or doesn't know John Dee, he needs to in some story or some book.
Oh, I don't actually know him. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Look up John Dee and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll be fast friends.
Okay, good to know.
There's no doubt. And of course, John Dee knows the scholar. There's no doubt.
Okay.
And if John Dee is undead or immortal, then he'll also know Alice. There's no doubt. Yeah, you'll have some great fun with John Dee. He's
All
a
right,
great
I got some
character
research
in
to do.
history. Yeah, no, he was Elizabeth's astrologer.
Oh, that would be an interesting character.
Yeah. I think you could have a lot of fun with that guy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, so there you go. There's a couple of little nuggets for you. I hope they come. I hope they become something. And if they do, get back in touch with me and we'll do another episode.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, Peter, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your work with us. Again, ladies and gentlemen, just go to peterdarbyshire.com. That makes it pretty easy. Of course, we'll have the link on all of our social media pages to go with this episode. So if you have trouble finding it, you can go there as well. Go to our Patreon page or our Facebook page to find that information. Before we wrap up this episode, I do have a few exciting announcements to share with all of you. First, a shout out to our final Quiller of the Month for 2024, Kara Elizabeth Martin. Thank you, Kara Elizabeth Martin, for your loyal support and congratulations on being the December 2024 Quiller of the Month. Next month starts a whole new round of special quillers. You too can be in the running each month by becoming a serial quiller at our Patreon page, where you can also unlock the bonus episode feature library, which continues to grow with new content. There's about, almost 25 hours of extra bonus material there that you can unlock at the Patreon page by becoming a serial quiller or higher. Also, the next bonus feature coming is going to be Luhrmann versus Zeffirelli, a deep dive into the two most iconic film adaptations of Romeo and Juliet. It's filled with details, behind the scenes information, and analysis, of course, of the two films and the choices that those two directors make with regards to their adaptations. So watch for that new bonus feature to drop next week. Also, speaking of the Patreon page, it is the only way, I will repeat, it is the only way you will be able to view and participate in our live 6th anniversary episode. Go to the Patreon page, become a member. You can join for free. You don't have to become a contributing member in order to gain access to the posts and information and, of course, the live show. But you do have to register as a member in order to get the special link on the night of the program. And that live recording will be conducted at 6 p.m. Pacific time, Tuesday, January 14th. That's 6 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday, January 14th. It will be our 151st official episode. There's one more episode between this one and that one, which will be 150. But it will be our 151st official episode and the celebration of the 6th anniversary of the program, which aired its first episode on January 16th, 2019. It seems so long ago, and we've come so far since then, haven't we? But we also have plenty ahead of us and plenty more to do. During the live anniversary show, you will be able to directly interact with producer Jake and me through the chat function as you watch and listen to us review 2024, read some of your reviews, letters, and comments, recap the 2024 Quillers of the Month, and respond to your live comments in real time. That's right. So the only way you can do that, though, is you have to register at the Patreon page. And then on the night of the show, you'll be able to follow the link to the live video broadcast, and you'll be able to write in your comments during the live show. And Jake will read those out for us, and we will respond to them in real time. But again, that is 6 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday, January 14th, and only through our Patreon page. If you don't tune in at 6 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday, January 14th, you'll have to wait until January 24th to gain access to the audio recording of that episode, and you won't be able to interact with us live in real time. So mark your calendars for when? 6 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday, January 14th, 2025, to join us for the live 6th anniversary episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. 2025 is going to be another great year for the program. New guests, returning popular guests, new deep dives into the canon, more live episodes. Yes, that's going to be fun. And more bonus material are all in the works, but you'll learn more about that, of course, on Tuesday, January 14th, because we will make those announcements, some of the schedules, some of the fun things that are going to be happening in the new year at the live production on the live recording of that episode. So see you there when? 6 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday, January 14th. Until then, don't forget to share the show with everyone you know. And remember, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.